Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today. I'm so excited for today's presentations. For those of you I haven't met, my name's Amanda Cote. I'm an associate professor at Michigan State University, and I run our Serious Game Design certificate. So when we were thinking about putting together a Games for Good session, um, I agreed to moderate that and to reach out and try and get our excellent speakers for today. So it is going to accidentally be a Michigan State heavy panel. That was not my intention, but it worked out because everyone associated with the school is doing cool things. We'll have two lovely speakers for you tonight. Unfortunately, our third panelist had a family emergency and was unable to make it. So now we're even more Michigan State heavy, as she was going to be our Carnegie Mellon representative. But Carrie Heeter, who's professor emeritus at Michigan State University, the original founder of the program that I now help direct, is going to be one of our panelists for tonight. And then Maura Philippone is a PhD student in communicative sciences and disorders, so focusing on questions of speech, speech therapy, and how games can be used in those spaces. So rather than me introduce them, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. They've come up with some quick intros to the kind of work that they've been doing. And then I have some questions prepared for us to move into a Q&A afterwards. But of course, our panelists and speakers are here for all of you to answer all of your questions. So feel free to raise your hand, to drop those questions into the chat at any point. I'm sure they'd be happy to hear what you want to know more about. So on that note, I guess if Carrie, you want to lead off with your introduction, that would be great.
Okay, sounds good. Hello. I'm going to be talking about mind tools as games for good. And as Amanda said, I'm professor emeritus. And what that means is that unlike all of your other professors, I haven't had the chance to talk with students in 3 years. So I'm like so excited that you all are here. So I want to hear from you more than from me. But anyway, so games for good. I'm supposed to introduce myself a little bit. As Amanda mentioned, I founded the Serious Game Design Graduate Certificate Program, I think in 2010. And so I kind of am you take games for fun and you say, oh, we could use that for serious purposes. And that's like kind of a travesty and like we're wrecking games and things like that. But there can be good reasons for that. So that was sort of my history of taking games and looking at serious but still fun things. And more recently, I've been taking serious meditation and making it fun. So, whatever the thing is, I want to do the opposite. And so what I want to share with you is what I consider to be a serious or a game for good. And that is a form of meditations that I've been making. I'm calling them mind tools and inspirations. For example, a chocolate test as a meditation is, you think of meditation as this serious thing with your legs are crossed and your eyes are closed. And well, the eyes closed kind of help. But anyway, so this is this series of short experiences that I have been making for people like you, actually. So these are free, short, like 3-minute experiences designed to help you operate your human system, drawing from yoga, science, and game design. Made for busy, smart, curious people trying to survive and thrive in challenging times. It's on Substack, it's free. There are 12 of them so far. I introduce a new one each week. And so before talking about what they are any more than that, what I want to do is have you all experience one. So please be comfortable seated. I'm going to play the audio online and it goes for 3 minutes. So here we go. Close your eyes and bring your attention to your shoulders. Without trying to change anything, notice how you're holding your shoulders. Be aware of physical sensations in your shoulders. Where is there effort? Where is there discomfort? Now allow your shoulders to begin to relax. Let your shoulders drop. Let your shoulders relax. Take your time. You can't make this happen. You allow it to happen. Perhaps using your exhale to help. Relaxing a little bit more each time you breathe out. Gently bring your attention back. Invite something you're intending to do to come to mind. Something you have to or want to or would rather not do. Invite something you're intending to do to come to mind. Do you notice when you anticipate doing that thing? Is there some eagerness? What does that eagerness feel like? Where do you feel it? Is there some dread? What does that dread feel like? Where do you feel it? Allow your anticipation of doing that thing to begin to relax. Take your time. You can't make this happen. You allow it to happen. Let your eagerness or dread get quieter. Perhaps using your exhale to help. Releasing a little bit more anticipation each time you breathe out. And when you've done this enough, gently open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. So, love to see people's faces. And what was the experience like for you, first of all? What happened for you? Maura, since you're right there, I'm going to call on you first. I can't see most people.
Sure. So I will say this was extra great timing because I'm in my comprehensive exam period
Oh,
this week.
great.
And I also came from kickboxing to here. So it was really extra super nice to have this mindfulness experience. And I think I've been going so quickly all day long that it made me kind of pause and notice kind of my own sensations, my own thoughts a little bit more, which was really nice.
Thank you. I'm seeing some things in the chat, which is great, but I'd love some other people to actually raise your hand and talk about what happened for you. G. Quinn, you're the brave one with the video on, so I can call on you.
Yeah. Is my audio working? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't done like a mindfulness exercise like that in a very long time, but it kind of, especially when I'm sitting at a computer like this, typically my posture gets very bad. So this just kind of paying attention to where like my weight was being placed and how really like made me very aware of that because I'm like, I'll be sitting there for hours, be like, wow, why does it hurt? Because I'm not really being mindful of like what my body is doing and how it is like coping with, oh, you've been putting so much stress on your shoulders and your back. It's time to relax. So I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. Did something specific that you were going to be doing show up for you when you called that to mind?
With this, I guess with the stress, like the weight in the shoulders, I guess there is a lot of responsibility because this game jam is pretty fast paced. And then I also have personal work side of the game jam. So I think it's just, oh, all of this pressure all at once. But I think being able to breathe in and out, like, oh, this is exactly the steps I need to take. That kind of came to mind. So it wasn't just a big ball of, oh no, responsibility. What exactly needs to get done?
So you were able to unpack, you were noticing things like how I'm sitting and the big glob of stuff I got to do started to like become more specific kind of things. Yeah, that's interesting. So Amanda, you want to talk about your shoulders?
Oh yes, I get massages semi-regularly, and every time I go, I get the dubious honor of the massage therapist telling me that I have the tightest shoulders of all of her clients. I think similarly to G Quinn, I'd sit at my computer and like let myself hunch, and then I go, work out and exercise, and that just adds more right there. So the focus on like slowly relaxing shoulders, getting them down away from my ears, so I'm not a turtle anymore. I feel like I need more of that in my life.
So shoulders are one of the places where we store our stress. That's kind of why this particular meditation did the shoulder stuff. Can we hear from one or two more students and then I'll go on with asking some questions?
Hi, agreeing with what G Quinn was saying, I definitely became much more aware of my posture during the exercise, and I realized I have been slumping due to like the busyness of both the game jam and everything else I've been up to this summer. It was nice to like take that step back and think about that.
It's crazy hard to imagine taking 3 minutes out of a day seriously. I mean, how do we, there is no time for that. Okay, so Dor says it's currently 2 a.m., so you'll type in the chat, but your face was scrunched up and yep, anticipating the tasks. Absolutely. So the graphic for this meditation is people getting ready to run, right? And the thing is that what we do is we stay in that position like our whole lives when it only really works right before you take off on the running field. So that's a bit of an issue. So here's my next question for you. Is this a game? I find, as a game designer, I think of this as designing a game. And so I want to ask you all, what are some ways that this is like creating a game or like playing a game? Setting intentions, say more about that, Genji.
Hi. I just finished an audiobook by David Lynch called Catching the Big Fish, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like this little 3-minute meditation was really helpful just because that was like on my mind. And then like of course I'm like, okay, I'll do that later. I'll meditate later. It's always like later, later, later. So this kind of just like forced me to just sit down. Like 3 minutes is not gonna hurt anyone to just sit. Yeah, and just like thinking about like intentions and like consciousness and like being mindful. And for me, it was also my shoulders. Um, like the first I like put back my shoulders immediately before it said to not do anything because I was already aware that my shoulders was not the way that I wanted it to be. Um, yeah, so that's what I am currently thinking about is intentions and setting intentions.
Yep, definitely. And we just don't, it's just taking these 3 minutes to notice, you start seeing all sorts of things. And G. Quinn is wondering about, can this be adapted for people who are deaf or hard of hearing? And actually on the Substack, I have the whole script written out and say, if you prefer to be guided, play the audio. So it can be read and you can do it that way right now on the Substack. That's there. But again, thinking about this as a game. Am I sharing screen? No, I'm not, right? Okay. I'm going to give away some answers here. No, I'm going to give away some questions, not answers. So let's go. So I'm going to skip past these for a minute. So one of the things it's doing is it's like the magic circle. Okay, in the game, you're entering the magic circle. And to get there, you sort of gather things. You set up the game, you review the rules, you start playing. So it's separate from everyday life. And in the mind tools, one of the ways that we're entering the magic circle is, you commit to, okay, I'm going to do this probably for 3 minutes. And then we almost always close your eyes. And that's, so you're moving other ways from outside of what normal everyday life is. And then there's actually 3 parts to it. So the first part is more part of entering into the game, where the first part is all about feeling and relaxing your shoulders. So it's easing into the experience, right? This is the script for that part. So it's It's starting to get you into the player actions of your attention, right? And so this is very much player active actions are attention, right, of what's going on. And you're noticing discomfort, we're cueing in the shoulders and that kind of thing. And we're bringing attention to the breath and we're relaxing. So that's sort of preparation for play. And then we get into new player actions, is the action of allowing something you're intending to do to come to mind. And these are actually deep skills in meditation, right? So novices can play this as well as people who've been meditating for 20 years. So it's designed to be very accessible. And it may or may not work. It'll work differently if you're doing it more often, every week or that kind of thing, right? So when that instruction came to allow something to come to mind, how did that work for people? Can a couple of people volunteer, was it right away? Did nothing come to mind, or did something show up? What went on for that? So since Dor typed something in the chat, I will pick on you. So you had typed, it's an interactive experience that challenges how you think. So in that way, it's similar to a game. What happened for you, Dor, when you were allowing something to come to mind? Did it show up right away? Did a bunch of things show up? Did nothing show up? What went on for you? And I'm not sure that Dor has a mic, so I'll go on to part 3 for a minute. The third part is releasing, right? So you'd already practiced relaxing the shoulders and letting go of that tension. So now you're releasing the tension of the anticipation. So sort of 3 phases. So I'm going to bounce forward. So these are some of the other ways that go on. Playtesting. These things are terrible if you don't playtest them. I'll give you an example of playtesting of a different one with a brain pulse where you're counting your thoughts. So I wanted to have people count their thoughts using their fingers so that the physical body would sort of pull, emphasize that was a thought, that was a thought, that was a thought. And I started to try to give instructions as to how to count with your fingers. So I'm going to stop the share here and ask someone with video on. Oh, I bet you all are real glad you don't have your video on. Is anybody else willing to turn on your video and show me how you count with your fingers? Be really good to have 2 different people do it. Ian, you're an angel. Show us how you count with your fingers. Can we pin him to be bigger? Nope. Okay. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so count to 10. Okay, there's 1, 2. The thumb is 3, then 4, then 5. Wow, do that. That was amazing. Do you realize what you did? You did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's really cool. And do it again. Do you do it the same way or do you do it a different way next time? Yep. Yep. That's pretty awesome. Thank you. Let's have one other person show us how you count with your fingers. Some other brave person. Amanda's looking brave. Go for it.
I believe William also came on
Oh,
camera.
William. Okay, William.
William,
Please,
do you want to show us yours?
Yeah, William. Show us how you count. Go ahead. Excellent. Okay, so notice that the first 2 people count differently. The way I count is with my hands on my thighs, like playing a piano, and I count that way. So when I was doing the instructions, I was starting to try to explain, okay, have your hands on your legs and do 1 finger. And what I learned from the playtesting is I need to not describe at all how to do it. I just say count with your fingers. Anyway, so playtesting is a thing. Player actions is a thing. What about repeat play? Is this is this particular mind tools something that you could do more than once? If you think yes, thumbs up. If you think no, thumbs down for repeat playability. And I'm not sure how I see that on people. There's a thumb up. Dor says yes, it's replayable. And Christian said, okay, so there's some sense that this can be done again because why can it be replayed? Why do you think? William, why is it replayable?
Well, it's just something you can always practice and get improve on it.
Yep. So, there is an endless tension of getting ready to do stuff. So different things will come up at different times, and the state of your shoulders, it'll be so it's a kind of thing that it really can be done more than one time. And what about player skill? Do you get better at it if you do it over time, if you play it again? My sense is, that people who do this kind of thing a lot, the experience changes. You get better at relaxing, your attention gets better. There are just many ways that the experience becomes different. So it's also, I try to make it a little bit fun, like you saw the chocolate test and other kinds of things. So what you've got, and what I'm here sort of and I'm going to close up right now, is that taking the skills of game design and the ways of thinking about life as a game designer and applying it to other kinds of things like meditation is one of the ways that you can take the skill set that you've been developing and apply it to so many different things in life. So just in case you're interested in more of these, this is the Substack address where you can subscribe and get emails to the new ones and all of them this week. And this is where my current website is yogamindtools.com. And thank you so much for being here and for participating and playing with me. I appreciate it. I'll put this in the chat so I can take down my share screen and other people can go on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carrie. I do feel much more relaxed and prepared for all of my tasks now, which
All
is
right.
good. Maura, if you would like to give your intro to yourself and your work, that would be great. And then we'll move into Q&A after that.
All right. So, hey y'all, I'm Maura. I am a speech pathologist by training, turned PhD student, and I study how we can use things like serious games and game-based approaches to level up Parkinson's voice and speech therapy. So, as Dr. Cote mentioned, I'm a PhD student at Michigan State. Go Green. And so I'll talk a little bit I'll give a brief overview of Parkinson's because some folks may be familiar with it, some folks not so much. So just to kind of set up the context for why I'm doing this work and kind of how it came to be. And then I'll chat through one of the games I co-designed with a team here at MSU. And then I welcome any insights, questions, feedback y'all have, because this is a really cool group. I'm really excited to be here and I would love to hear your thoughts. So first and foremost, Parkinson's disease, why it happens, we still don't quite know. We've learned a little bit at this point. So we know that sometimes Parkinson's is caused by certain genetic factors or genes. Sometimes it's caused by folks being exposed to certain neurotoxins or things that kill off brain cells, like Agent Orange or other sorts of neurotoxins that kill off the cells that make dopamine in the brain. That can cause Parkinson's. Or in a lot of cases, some folks develop Parkinson's and we don't know why. The fancy word for that is idiopathic, when we don't know why it happens, but we do know that they have it. So what Parkinson's does is with Parkinson's, we see a progressive cell death, which means we see more and more cell death as time goes on. And those cells that are dying are those cells that make dopamine. Why dopamine matters is that's our go or no-go neurotransmitter. So if you think of the dopamine producing cells kind of like at the game control center or your little game controller, when we have less of those dopamine cells, it's like all of a sudden you get a glitchy controller where those motor signals are not going through to the brain properly. So we start to see some funky symptoms pop up, like tremor, which if you know Parkinson's, that's usually the one people think of first. We may also see something called rigidity, where our folks with Parkinson's, I don't know if you can see, this is a funky background for this, but our folks with Parkinson's, sometimes because of how the brain and the muscle movement communications change, sometimes they get really rigid muscles where it's hard to move things super smoothly. Or we may also see, the fancy word for it is bradykinesia, and that is slow or reduced movements. So if anyone has seen the movie Zootopia, there's a character in there called Flash, who's a sloth. And he moves really slow Now, granted, people at different points in the disease progression may not move, if they're earlier on, they may not move quite so slowly, but that's the idea. That's a nice comparison for what bradykinesia is. So because we have less dopamine, our folks with Parkinson's often have tremor, rigidity, or that slow movement, bradykinesia. And then alongside those symptoms, those motor symptoms, because there's less dopamine hanging around, our folks with Parkinson's may also experience depression and reduced motivation. So they may not be as motivated to do things like certain activities they used to enjoy or certain therapy exercises that aren't super motivating. In terms of communication challenges that pop up with Parkinson's, I'm a speech pathologist by training, so a lot of what I do centers around voice and speech. Because of these motor symptoms they experience, over time, our folks with Parkinson's tend to make smaller and smaller mouth movements and have quieter speech. So if anyone's seen the movie Pitch Perfect, the example I usually use when I teach students about Parkinson's motor speech is that girl from Pitch Perfect, and I always forget her name, but she kind of talks like this, and in the movie, she happens to talk about how she ate her twin in the womb, and that's just a vibe. So it's a great student example, and they tend to get a kick out of it in class. But that's the idea. Over time, they tend to speak with really small movements, really quiet speech, which can make them really hard to understand in conversations, especially if there's background noise or multiple people. It's hard for them to be understood. Or if they're on the phone, sometimes there's some phone signals get noisy. And if someone's got that quiet speech going on, it can be hard to hear them and understand them. And if you're talking and it's hard for people to understand you, that's going to make things like self-advocacy, when you go to doctor's appointments and you have to communicate with people and so on and so forth, that can be really challenging. So that's where there's a huge need for our folks with Parkinson's to support their communication. So some things we do in my neck of the woods in speech therapy, when we're working with the speakers themselves or the folks with Parkinson's, we can teach them to use what's called clear speech. And you can do this too in your everyday lives if you find that your speech could do with a little more clarity. The way we train this is we train people to speak clearly, over enunciating like you're speaking to someone who's having difficulty understanding you. Why that helps is it counteracts those smaller movements and that quieter voice. And you may notice this too, if you speak how you usually speak, and then you speak clearly, notice how your movements may get a little bigger, your voice may get a little louder, and even in you, that may help your speech sound easier to understand. And for our folks with Parkinson's, we often find that as well. We may also train them to use loud speech. And I put that in quotes because when we train them to use loud speech, what we're really doing is bringing them to a more typical level of loudness. We're bringing them from that quiet speech they start out with to a typical level. And then we may also train them to advocate for themselves and tell people they're speaking with, hey, if I'm talking to you, please don't feel like you have to be polite. If you didn't catch what I said, let me know so I know to say it again. Why that matters is because of how Parkinson's changes the brain. It changes sensory perception. So one tricky piece that happens is our folks with Parkinson's, if they're speaking quieter or unclearly, they may, because that feedback is impaired, they may not realize they're speaking quietly. Whereas someone without Parkinson's, if you've ever been in a noisy restaurant or at like a rock concert, and then you go to the quiet outside, and you're talking really loud in the noisy environment, and then you get outside and whoa, I'm talking really loud. You have that sensory perception, and you can then adjust how you're speaking. In our folks with Parkinson's, that's impaired, and that can make practice really challenging, which is why we pull in their listeners, whether that's someone at home or someone they communicate with, whether it's a caregiver or a neighbor or somebody they see. We try to pull in listeners and give them some tips and tricks whenever we can. So we may train these listeners to say, hey, if you really didn't catch it, don't be polite and pretend like you did. Let them know, hey, tell me that again. And extra super bonus points if you let them know that they should use a strategy. Tell me that again even louder. Tell me that again even clearer. And then we can also train them to set the person up for success. So we can if they notice that there's lots of background noise in the environment, or they notice there are lots of folks in the group they're speaking to, we can train our listeners as well as our speakers to say, hey, what can I adjust here? Maybe if we're standing right next to the speakers at this rock concert and we can move away, maybe let's move away. Or, hey, maybe when I'm talking to this person with Parkinson's, let's face them so I can see their face and watch their mouth movements and have a better shot at understanding what they're saying, that sort of thing. So we do have standardized speech treatments for this. They're usually pretty intense. Things like having folks come in 4 times a week for an hour each session for 4 weeks. And a lot of these, the basis of these approaches is if you complete these drills regularly on this intensive schedule, we can build up some strength and try to maintain that strength for as long as possible throughout the disease progression. So they are typically pretty effective as long as folks do them. They tend to work. The tricky piece is they're drill-based. So our folks with Parkinson's who already have a dopamine deficiency and already are more likely to experience things like depression and reduced motivation, as a result of that, they may not be as motivated to stick with these largely boring treatments. So that's where the idea for game-based treatments comes in. So this brainchild is the result of not only my excellent team and mentor collaborations and guidance throughout this process, it's also the result of both my experiences as a clinician working with clients and listening to their perspectives and noticing what things worked well and what things really weren't working well and seemed like we needed something else going on. And also noticing some reports in the literature, in the research, where there are reports of people with Parkinson's describing some standardized approaches as, quote unquote, boring. So it's extra rationale for, hey, how can we design a more engaging, more motivating treatment so they can practice these skills and then hopefully make those gains and maintain them for longer. So that's where Clearly came into be. It's based on that idea of clear and loud speech to counteract Parkinson's difficulties. And it's designed to be, it's essentially Pictionary meets Guess Who, if anyone's played those games, where it's a collaborative, except this is a collaborative game because we thought about it and realized early on that making a competitive game would incentivize unclear speech and that would be unhelpful. So we went with a collaborative game. So the idea is people play this in speaker-listener teams. The speaker describes the picture, and that's, can y'all see my cursor? Nice. So the speaker is going to describe this picture. We have a carrier phrase for them to let them know, because our folks with Parkinson's may also have cognitive difficulties. So depending on where they're at and what they got going on, this may be helpful for our folks who may need a little reminder of, okay, what exactly am I supposed to do here? Right. And we also built in that primer of, hey, you're going to say this clearly, right? Right? Yeah. So they'll describe what they see in the picture. We have this can say word that can be a nice bit of scaffolding for our folks with more cognitive difficulties who need that support. Or they can just skip right on past it and go to our little moment of inhibition, a don't say word. So for our folks with more difficulties, we can omit this part of the game. But for our folks who are ready and down for that challenge, this is a word they can talk around to add an inhibition element and up that challenge level in the game. So they'll describe this picture. We have a loudness bar to let them know whether or not they're in the target range. And then their listener partner is going to have a field of 8 options. And this is where we'll get, the speaker gets feedback on how loud they are with this loudness bar, and the listener gives feedback on how clear they were, because that can be kind of subjective. So the way we give them that is, how clear are you? Well, did the listener understand the picture description and pick the right one, or not so much? So if the listener understands and the speaker speaks clearly and loudly, the listener understands and they guess the right one, we get this little star icon. If not, they get an X, and that lets them know, ooh, not so much. And at the end of the game round, they get this feedback screen. So this is where we're at currently with the prototype. And again, if y'all have any suggestions, if things come to mind, or just any thoughts, I would love to hear them, love to hear any comments y'all have. So looking ahead, our future directions, we're currently, I've got a grant proposal drafting in the works right now, and we're looking to do some formal user and usability testing with target users. So we've done some informal testing, mostly with our lovely folks in the lab who I bribed with donuts to try the game and help us work out some kinks. And then, but we'd like to test this out with actual folks with Parkinson's to get a sense of what's working well, what's not working so well, and what can we adjust to make this centered more around their needs and their preferences. And then we want to do some experimental testing to see, hey, is playing this game an efficacious supplement to our existing voice and speech therapy approaches? So hopefully I didn't talk too long. I do talk for a living and I talk about talking for a living. So that's doubly setting me up. But thank you all for listening. If I can share these slides as well, if people want them, and let me know where to send them and I'll send them. But yeah, I'm happy to open things up for chatting, discussion, feedback, and double back for things. But thanks you all for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Maura. I'll let Maura leave this slide up for a second so that if anybody wants to take down contact info, you can. Now, I know many of the people who are here today are probably in the IndieCade Climate Jam this summer. And I will say I deliberately picked people who are making games not about climate because I think we want to consider design really broadly. I think we want to think about how we can design for multiple goals at once, and then maybe by seeing what someone does in another space or for another question, it might help inspire some of your thoughts about your climate game. And I see I don't even need to ask a question in the Q&A because G. Quinn already has one in the chat for you, Maura. Did you run into any issues with accessibility or motor skills needed to tap a screen or computer keyboard?
So that's a good question. So with our lab assistants, they were undergrad and grad students, and they didn't have any motor difficulties. But we do anticipate running into that with our folks with Parkinson's, which is why we want to test drive things. And I will say this, so to talk through kind of the process, this game did start out as a paper prototype, where I initially, in my speechy ways, not thinking about things like hands, I was like, oh, a card game would be great, because then they can practice picking up cards and practice fine motor skills. And I happened to pilot, I will say, so actually, no, I guess I did do some informal, now that it's all coming back to me. There was one PhD student. So I roped my PhD student friends into doing the very, very first card game informal user test, and I did bribe them also with food. And one of them did have a left-hand mobility difficulty, where he had left-hand weakness. And he was the one who said, hey, these folks are going to have difficulty picking up cards. So why don't you think about putting it into a digital card game so people can tap, and then also you can have other accessibility features like text to speech or adjusting the size of the text and that sort of thing. It would be a win-win. And I was like, that is great feedback. So yes, our folks with Parkinson's often have fine motor difficulties, either with tremor or some of that rigidity or bradykinesia, that slow movement. And then because they tend to be older adults, we also may see accessibility difficulties with things like vision and needing to adjust text sizes and things like that. And then at present, data shows that it's typically more prevalent in men. So we also were thinking about things like color blindness. And that's also why our Clearly game has a pink and green color scheme. Because fun fact, in Parkinson's, the most prevalent type of color blindness is tritanopia. So pink and green tend to be the better color scheme for that, at least based on what we see in the literature at this point. So there are a number of population-specific and demographic-related accessibility considerations we think about that we haven't yet had a chance to do to sift through informal user testing, but hopefully future us will be able to get some of that insight. Great question, though.
And Carrie, did you have anything that you wanted to add a little bit more about how you consider accessibility in your work as well?
One of the biggest accessibility issues that I've dealt with was duration of the experience. And so I was originally doing 25-minute things, and then I switched to 10 minutes, and people can't do that, right? And so going down to between 1 and 3 minutes changed it so that it was something, I mean, and I know that's not what we normally think about as far as accessibility, but it's a combination of attention span and seeing how I can possibly fit this into my life. So there's that, and as I said before, the full script is available, and most people, even 3 minutes is too long to imagine pushing and sitting through, so they read it and do it on their own. And they tend to do that for like 5 or 6 mind tools, and then they finally try the audio and go, oh, that was a lot better, you know? And then then we got them hooked. So, but no, I don't particularly have more to add about that. I mean, other than, another form of accessibility is people who are totally new to this, and so that's been a huge consideration. I know that I'm sure a lot of the students on here have never wanted to do meditation, and a lot of the people who are currently subscribers to this are this wonderful mix of completely would never consider it, not interested, and off the deep end doing it for all, for decades. So I'm really trying to walk that line in terms of having the instructions meet people generally where they are.
I really like those examples because a lot of the time people argue that they don't play games because they don't have time or they don't even know where to start. And so as designers, it's really important to think about like, well, who am I trying to reach and what kinds of existing knowledge are they likely to have? Am I as a gamer going to accidentally make this inaccessible to people because I assume they have knowledge that they don't have? So that is really great to keep in mind. So we are, as you can tell, moving into our Q&A part of the evening. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask them out loud or drop them in the chat. But one of the things I wanted to ask about is, it seems like both of you had pretty clear ideas of what you wanted to accomplish. Maura, you'd identified this need for Parkinson's vocal therapies to be more engaging, to motivate people to do them regularly. Carrie, obviously, we all need more relaxation and more mindfulness based on our response to even the 3 minutes earlier. But what made you decide to translate things into a game, and how did you go about addressing the goal you wanted to accomplish via game design?
I was a game designer before I was a meditation teacher. And before that, I was a user experience designer before there were particularly games. And so that's how I actually approach everything. And so my meditation colleagues freak out when I say, no, I use game design techniques. That's just how I think, right? So, and I like it to be fun, and that's not the norm for meditation. But I published a book that includes about 50 examples of, safe as a giant clam. I mean, you want to add this fun element that makes it accessible in a different way, makes you want to do it, right? So it's not just focus on your breath for 3 minutes. It's like, there's going to be something intriguing in here that's going to be interesting.
You're coming from like the more of the game design and UX side, and I am coming from outside and slowly working my way into the game design and UX field. So it's a nice little balance and merging of things. In my work, a lot of what informed my decision to see how we could design games was working clinically with folks. And I happen to be certified in the 2 most prominent standardized approaches for Parkinson's voice and speech. So I've done both of them. I'm not going to name any names because I do enjoy the possibility of having a career. But I've done both treatments, and I noticed that some of my folks who were naturally more regimented really loved having to do the same exercises every day, forever and ever. And some of my folks who were already not so much that way and didn't love that, didn't stick with them. So we would do the 4 weeks of intense therapy, and then we do our usual check-in in a month and see how things are going. And when I check in with my folks who weren't really about the regimented life, they were like, yeah, I did it for the first couple of days, and then I kind of fell off the wagon because it just isn't fun. It's boring. It's for all intents and purposes, not user-centered for them. It's not particularly salient or motivating or enjoyable for them. So it got me thinking about how can we address these folks? There's currently a gap here. They're falling through the cracks where our folks for whom these existing interventions work cool, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But for our folks who these aren't really working well, at least not after the intensive treatment period, what can we do to make a more engaging supplement that they're more likely to stick with? And then the other piece that got me thinking about it was because Parkinson's goes with a dopamine deficiency, that goes right along with it. And we see an association between dopaminergic processes and gameplay. It seemed like a nice way to capitalize on natural processes and use that alongside some of the other medical interventions they're going and getting for their Parkinson's and seeing if we could use that to augment some of the benefits and get them practicing these skills in that way as well. So that kind of fed into the whole game design piece.
You know, you're getting me thinking a little bit. So like in the old days when I was studying foreign languages for getting ready to go on a trip, they'd be giving me this list of vocabulary. And it's like, I don't think I need to know the word for rocking chair when I'm going to Barcelona. What about relevant or fun words? And so, the list of your words, the words themselves matter. It's a source for fun and a little transgression. I don't know how far you want to go with swear words or goofy or silly, but mix it up there. So it's not just rocking chair or the dull stuff.
Absolutely, 100%.
I think that's
Let's
why
see.
Duolingo occasionally gives you just very unhinged sentences
Yeah.
to make them more memorable.
Right.
The challenges, I think, when people think of games for good or serious games is that they're used to seeing serious games that are perhaps what we might call the chocolate covered broccoli approach, where like there's a lesson that it wants to teach you and it puts maybe a veneer of a game on it, but doesn't actually think gamefully. So how do you balance entertainment, fun, or engagement with whatever the other goal is you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I have a lot of constraints in that I know that I need to help people change the state of their system and get the focus inward. I need to get them to step away from everything that's going on there and come inward. And so there's a lot of things that in order for it to actually be, for things to show up, for it to actually work, I have to find ways to do it. That sounds kind of vague, but it's not that I can just say, oh, just think about this thing and we're fine, right? It's actually a very careful orchestration, trying to make it as palatable, interesting, and in some ways engaging. I don't know that it's fun to focus on your shoulders. It's not necessarily fun all the time, but interesting is a form of fun, right? And feeling no awareness. I mean, so I guess I try to make the goals of awareness and attention and interesting, So I don't know. That's an answer.
Yeah, I think I also run into a couple of constraints that have to do with not only the populations my target player populations, but also my other stakeholders like speech pathologists, where I have to think about, okay, I have to design a game that is not only acceptable and hopefully enjoyable to folks with Parkinson's and their caregivers, but also that speech pathologists are going to be open to using and recommending to their clients and family and caregivers. So, and one challenge I've encountered is a lot of times, and it has to do with, it is specific to certain places and contexts, but in some contexts, speech pathologists have historically been treated as people who don't have medical expertise yet are still working in medical settings. And so a lot of folks have this aversion to playing in therapy or to calling it that, even if that's what they're doing. They have an aversion to calling it a game or calling it play because they don't want to downplay what they're doing. And so one thing I really try to clearly convey to my key stakeholders, especially my clinicians, is, okay, yes, technically this is a game, but it is serious. There are serious objectives and it's evidence-based. And that is part of the rationale. And that's why we're doing this work, so that we can design evidence-based games. These aren't just fun little games that came out of nowhere. They're based on real concepts, real theory, and we want to make sure that they really do work so that we can have more engaging and motivating approaches. So that's one thing I have to balance is key stakeholder perceptions of my game. And then also thinking about with folks with Parkinson's, fatigue is a huge consideration. So when I designed the game, I had to think about how can I make these game rounds relatively short? And it's something I had to think about, okay, it's not something that would be short for me. It has to be something that would be short for someone who has difficulty talking. So whereas I could read off 10 of those cards probably in the span of like 3 minutes. I'm from New York originally, so I could talk really fast. But my folks with Parkinson's, it might take them a little bit longer to read those cards. So thinking not only about perceptions, but resources and accessibility considerations like fatigue, motor skills, and how much gameplay they can do and what I can ask them to do realistically in a game. Those sorts of things.
Do you think it would be the kind of thing where they could play it one word and then come back later in the day and play one word and that kind of thing so that it doesn't enter into the fatigue thing, but becomes a habit sprinkled out throughout the day or something like that?
So it would be nice if I would have to think a little more about the design, because one key element of our current design is building in real human listeners, because
Right.
they can't
So you need them to
necessarily
be
judge their own
available.
perception. Yeah. So I will say for our folks who are a little techier, I did my clinical fellowship in Seattle, so naturally I was around some techier folks. So for folks who are more familiar with smartphones and cameras, they can record themselves and then listen back. And an interesting thing with our folks with Parkinson's is if they listen to a recording, they can then perceive. So one strategy as a clinician I would use is I'd say, hey, it feels like you're shouting at me when you talk loud. Okay, hey, let's have this let's chat a little bit. You use your loud voice, and then we'll see how your loudness compares to mine. And that can kind of show them, hey, you're speaking at a pretty typical loudness level, even if it feels like you're shouting. But if they were to play that throughout the game, if it would be tricky for folks who don't have access to family and caregivers and other folks they could play with. So I'd have to think a little bit more about that and how to build more of that feedback into the game itself. But I do love your idea of that kind of piecemeal practice where it's less fatiguing, not so much all at once. I'll have to think more about that.
It's always nice to have lots of things to think about, I think. I do think none of us are enthusiastic enough, but that's okay.
I do also like this attention to context though, because I remember when you were first working on Clearly in class, Maura, I kept saying, a minute seems like a really long time for a round. And I was thinking in terms of fast-paced, like more entertainment-based games like Taboo, where of course you're supposed to go as quickly as possible. And I will admit I was wrong on that one, like that a minute for the particular considerations of the audience that you are targeting is really not that long. To read the card, to process it, to start speaking out the answer, to try and get it right, and then, to move on to the next round. So that question of fatigue and audience, what balanced fun and entertainment for me might not be the same as what's a balance of fun and outcomes for the audience. And so I appreciated that your team, pushed back on that one and said, well, we're going to keep it for now, and we can always adjust this later as we play test. Yeah, that was a good choice. One of the things a lot of our students are doing this year, as I said, the climate game jam. Do people just want to like react, thumbs up, or wave their hand if they're in the climate game jam? I'm curious how much of our audience today is jammers.
And how many are jamming right now while you're attending this talk?
Oh, excellent. We've got some hands going up. We got some thumbs up, some claps.
Some thunder.
It is thankfully a long-term game jam, so, but it's still relatively early into the jam right now. So one of the questions that I have is, what do you wish you knew when you first started this process? What would have made it easy had you like known it at the beginning? Easier.
I don't need it to be easy. I love the journey and the iteration. It's just such a a joy to get to try stuff and revise it and explore. But that's because the process is fun. I mean, it would just be weird if 10, 14 years ago when I started doing it, it came out perfect and that's all I'm doing for the rest of my life. That would be weird.
I think one thing that that's been helpful to learn more about is kind of what the options are, because I crack a lot of jokes to my friends and my family, because most of my family, I explain what I do for my PhD stuff, and they're like, cool, cool, cool. What's that mean? So it's been nice to learn more about what the options are within game design, because before starting my studies, I really only knew about like board games, and my mom was not a video game fan, so I've had to like post hoc develop some video game knowledge and expertise in playing. So it's been nice to learn more about the options and let that inform some of the choices I make too, even though I still do have to balance with some acceptability pieces within my field and the disciplines related to it. But that's where it's been really nice to chat with game design folks who are open to my ridiculous questions that are like very, very basic things that they're like, yeah, you guys don't talk about that in your field? And I'm like, no, we don't cover game design in speech school, actually. Or even especially when it comes to like game development stuff, I am learning to love coding in R and Python, and I really can't bring myself to do other languages beyond that point at this point, because we don't cover coding in speech school, at least not that kind. We only do language coding, which is totally different. But so that's where it's been really nice to chat with game design experts. And that's where for all of y'all, if you're feeling like you're early in your career and you're like, what do I have to offer to a team? That even those basic things that you're like, of course, everybody knows this. Reminder that everybody may know that in game design, but not outside the field. So especially if you're collaborating with folks outside your field, super helpful to share your fun tips and tricks, or let them know like, hey, like, let's chat about what I do, let's chat about what you do. And it's really nice to have those collaborations and learning moments, because like Carrie was saying, it really is a journey, and I think those moments kind of inspire and can nudge direction along the journey too.
I really like both those answers, that not being perfect the first time, expecting to iterate, and then learning a lot from others are all good parts of the process. And it looks like that's very similar to what Belle has just added in the chat as well. The most important lesson learned early on is be open to change and expect lots of changes. Yes, it can be hard, especially when you're students, right? You're used to trying to get an A and getting everything right the first time, and then to walk into a field where people tell you, it's not going to be right the first time. It's not even going to be close. And then you're going to iterate it and you're going to make it better and you're going to talk to other people. That can be, I think, a really hard transition to make. So these are really good reminders, that changing your design is a good thing and pivoting as you get more feedback. Lincoln, I had seen your hand up. I wasn't sure if it was still just from the check-in for Game Jammers or if you had a question. I wanted to make sure we didn't miss it if you had a question. One of the things that I think has come up a little bit organically, Carrie, you mentioned playtesting, how people count on their fingers. I realized I count like this, or I do the piano thing, but it depends on context. If I'm counting items, it will be piano. If I'm just doing a countdown, it will be up here. But obviously that reminded you of the need for playtesting, making sure that things fit into multiple people's experiences. And Maura, you said you're playtesting as part of your PhD work. How do you go about this? How do you recruit people? How do you decide what to ask them? And how do you evaluate the results after you've put your game in front of people to figure out where you need to go next?
I have a small group of meditation group that I teach a meditation to every week, and we talk about it afterwards for quite a long time. And so they sort of help me play test a bunch of ideas, but by now they're like totally contaminated. They're not representative of everybody. But when it totally bombs, that's a really good sign, and each of them has a different experience. So that's really helpful. But that's a 25-minute thing. And so I also personally participate in a lot of different meditations. So I've been led in meditation, probably thousands of different ones. So I have the experience of being a user and having all these different kinds of things. Then I create it and I revise it a bunch of times before I post it every week. I don't have the feedback that I want right now because I'm just posting them on here and I have a bunch of subscribers and people doing it, but I want to watch people doing it because from teaching yoga and meditation, I can see some of the things that are happening and then to talk with them about it. So I want to move to the point where I recruit a small group who are willing to let me watch them do it and talk about it. So it's really important, and I don't have that yet. I'm sort of drawing on a bunch of experience and my big group kind of a thing. But I need more.
I think for me, definitely being in the PhD program does shape a lot of my approach to user testing, where if I'm running formal studies, I'm going through the IRB and getting approval and doing all of that. But before I get to that point, I still do the informal user testing, where I'll think about who could give me expert insights and who will be brutally honest with me about which parts are working well and which parts kind of aren't great and need to change. So that's where I've been pretty fortunate to have a lot of folks in the program who are just in my network that I can just be like, hey, if I give you donuts, will you come and user test this for me? And that's been pretty nice. But I think if you have something that you're looking to test, it's totally legit to reach out to, if you're, depending on what the concept is, if you know folks who would have relevant insights, or if you're looking for folks who don't know anything about it at all and you want to see what happens when they try it, you can get lots of valuable information from different sources of that kind. So you can think about who's in your network. If you're looking to do more formal stuff, more researchy stuff, if there are any universities or schools in your area, you might be able to reach out to professors and see if there are any avenues for collaborations, whether they have some research assistantships or research volunteer type work that may be available to you, or any avenues for collaboration they can think of. It's worth opportunity spotting there. So I think you can go the more formal route of like IRB university stuff, but it's also super valuable to see who's in your network, see who you got hanging around and who you have access to and who might be willing to test your game.
There's the challenge of your target audience that in many cases is a protected target. For example, patients with Parkinson's or kids, right? And so for a while you're playtesting to make sure that the game is playable, that it doesn't get stuck somewhere, but you realize all the time that this isn't your real audience, right? If you're making it for sixth graders, but you're testing it with college student game design students, that's a different kind of thing. But there are stages of who you go to for it. I also you reminded me of a funny story that might be relevant to these people. One of the meditations that I taught that totally bombed with my user group, my test group, my testers, was I was so excited. I was going to teach a first day of school meditation. So, remember the excitement of the first day of school. And, I love school. And the first day of school is like so exciting. And every single person in my group hated the first day of school. They said, there's all these strangers, you're awkward, you don't know what's going on, you find all the work you have to do. And I'm like, I was just crushed. Nobody liked that. So I get teased sometimes when I do another bombing one and say, nope, that's another first day of school meditation, Carrie, don't do that, or that kind of thing. So, you need a sense of humor when it doesn't work. And also playtesting is a really good way to deal with disagreements on the game design team. You got some person who's saying it absolutely has to have the description of the dinosaur throughout its life cycle. And the other person says, no, that can't be there. I say, okay, let's make two prototypes and try them both out. And it's really inarguable when nobody looks at the history of it. It's like, okay, that was a bad idea. So it's helpful from the design process.
Yeah, I feel like you both just covered a lot of things there. The benefits of testing with experts, people who know what's going on, who can evaluate your content for you. The benefit of testing with people who have no idea what's going on to make sure that, It's not only understandable to your experts, making sure your playtesting goes, quickly, that you can get feedback, that you can iterate, that it can help you make your design decisions, but also the benefits of perhaps more long-term feedback as well. And I had a really funny experience with this past term. One of my students is in Oregon. And so he was playtesting his game, which is actually a climate game, with, whoever was available to him. And I ran some playtests with students here at MSU. And not a single student group lost the game because they were all very mechanics driven, very focused. They read the rules, they optimized how they could approach this game. They realized they needed to play collaboratively, sequentially, and they needed to consult on which cards each was going to play, all of which was allowed in the rules, and they won every single time. And every time Don playtested with a group of people who were not game design students, they all lost every single time. So I wasn't completely sure what the takeaway was here about his game, because he, of course, intended it not just for game design students, but it really was a sign that the mechanics were very obvious of the game. And if you were a person who approached a game mechanically, you were probably going to win. And so I'm not sure how he's planning to adjust with that result, because, of course, game design students are not his main focus. Everyday people who are interested in the environment and climate change are his audience. But it showed the pros and cons of playtesting with different kinds of people really very clearly. So don't only
Great
playtest
example.
with other game students is the takeaway, I guess. Sorry, Carrie, what were you saying?
I was just complimenting you on that fun example. Yeah, so true.
Yes. Yeah, he wanted decision making in the game to be very democratic, where people talked about it, but the game design students talked only about how to win and less about the content, which I think perhaps took away from it a little bit. How often do you draw on existing games for inspiration for your designs versus try and do your own thing?
Go ahead, Maura.
I think.
Oh, the cat. I'm sorry, the cat.
He's so mad right now.
He's a guest star. We have a guest star in our midst. Hello, hello. Oh my gosh. So in my work, I think it's pretty field specific for why we draw on existing games, and a lot of that is in speech therapy. One of the interesting observations I have is that we pretty naturally use game-based approaches with kids, because we just automatically in speech are like, yeah, no kid is going to sit there and do drills with us. They're going to just not have any of that. So of course we have to make it a game. We have to make it fun. But then for some reason, there's this existing practice to only do drills with adults. But that said, a lot of times if there are commercially available games that we can kind of morph to fit our targets, that's a pretty common practice in speech therapy. And while we wouldn't necessarily document it in our medical notes as like, oh, we played a game in speech today with an adult, we would say we addressed this skill in this context. So things like taboo, if we're working with whether it's executive function or memory, or even doing voice and speech skills and practicing sustaining them with a higher cognitive load, we may use commercial games for that. I've used games like headbands for some of my language clients, where if they have aphasia, where they have difficulty with language and finding words or getting their words out. I've used the headbands game, where if you've ever played, there's a picture card, and the person playing sitting opposite of you can see the card, but you can't. And that could be a nice way to practice talking around words and getting target information. So essentially just using commercially available games and kind of morphing them to your needs. When I've played headbands or similar games, I've often just disregarded the time limit, because for my folks in a clinical context, it's just not feasible. They're going to rage quit on me if I give them a time limit they can't do. So that's where I'll kind of modify the rules as needed. But if I've got some smarties in my midst and they're acing all of my exercises, I am absolutely not opposed to putting that time limit back. So I think just in my work, there's more of a natural inclination to draw on existing games. and also thinking about my stakeholders and acceptability. They're more likely to engage with things that are a little bit more similar to what they already do versus things that are way outside of their comfort zone at this point. So a little bit of those.
That makes a lot of sense. For me, because I'm trying to appeal to people who are totally outside of meditation as well as people who are experienced in it, I need to not do a lot of the things that they do in some of those traditional ones. But I personally take classes every week to learn more about meditation, and that's been going on for more than a decade. I experience tons of them. I also turn to science that talks about how the mind and body work together and things like that. And I look for fun and cool things that happen in daily life that might draw in to be a great example or a window or an entry into it. Like my own personal experiences, like the chocolate test, which I mean, just to say, I mean, because, right, so things that light people up, right? So for the chocolate test mind tool, for me, I love dark chocolate. And so I eat a couple of bars a day. I look forward to it. And I put a bar in my mouth. And too often I then start doing the next thing and I don't even stop to taste it when it's in my mouth. And so that's the chocolate test of whether I'm like stopping to experience life or ignoring it. Like, what a waste of chocolate to have just instead, moved on to writing the grant proposal while I'm eating the chocolate. But it's not about chocolate in that it's something that you love, that because I don't want it to be just to me. But so I look for fun experiences throughout life that might make a cool meditation to adapt the other stuff to.
And William, you weighed in on this in the chat, saying that you draw on existing games all the time through gameplay or story. Would you be willing to share an example? Or does anybody else have an example of a time when it's been useful to draw on an existing game for inspiration or to help you work through a problem?
Playing games a lot, they become part of us and we draw on them consciously or unconsciously too, in a good way. I mean,
I've been doing a lot of writing lately about Will Wright, the designer
oh
of The
yeah.
Sims and SimCity and everything. And he likes to say that the cheapest prototypes you'll ever get are other people's games. So that playing through an existing game can help you think about, well, do I really like this mechanic or do I want to do something different? Because they're already out there and available to you. So we are coming a little bit to the end of our time. I'm trying to think of what's a good ending question.
How are people's shoulders doing?
Mine are still hanging in there.
Yeah, all right, that's good. And what are you anticipating doing next?
Well, hopefully asking a good final question
All right, I'll let you do that.
and then going to sleep. But tomorrow, I have to collect a lot of data for a research project I'm on. And that's been the big thing that I've been carrying because it's a long, slow, laborious process. So I'm going to try and make sure that I take my mindfulness breaks during it. I actually have different questions for each of you. So for Carrie, I think I'll start with you. You've been doing this a while. You said that you founded the Serious Games research program 15-ish years ago. So I guess, how do you think either Serious Games or Games for Good or your own perspective on them has changed over the time that you've been doing this work?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know.
Because the longer one has lived, the bigger that question is. So I started teaching at Michigan State University when cable TV was an innovation, that there were going to be 10 TV channels instead of 3, and there were no personal computers. Yeah, and so I actually wrote my dissertation on the nature of interactivity and how we could get people to participate in creation of things. And that was anyway. So that's kind of an impossible question for me, because my experience goes so back before there were games. But I really want people to be engaged and co-creation. Co-creation is my ultimate goal. So that's part of why I fell in love with meditation, is the experiences are co-created. They happen inside of you, and really it's your whole body, your whole experience, and what comes to you that's part of it. So I think that meditation let me do co-creation even better than the game medium did. Maybe I came around to an answer. Maybe.
It was a very big question. My one for Maura might be a little bit easier, but Maura, you're a current student, you're coming to this a little bit more recently. What do you think is most important to keep in mind when you're approaching these types of topics, serious game design, from a student perspective? What would you recommend to other students?
I would think I would recommend really drawing inspiration from Carrie's activities and thoughts here, adding in pauses throughout the process. A lot of times I think it feels like you're rushing to a time point, whether it's making a deadline, making a grade, something like that. And it shifts your focus away from the target population and why you're making the game in the first place. And I guess if you're making a game for a grade, cool, but I say if you're going to make a game for a grade, you might as well have fun with it. So I think I would recommend just periodically checking in and seeing and shifting back to, what am I making this game about? Who am I making this game for? Why am I doing this? And if you find that your focus has shifted away, like see how you can shift it back. Okay, if I were standing at a different angle right now, if anyone's seen Big Hero 6, low-key sad movie, but the shaking it up and like leaning upside down and literally looking at things from a different angle, that is very real. So if you find you're getting stuck, even if you make that pause point and you're like, why am I doing this? I don't know. I would recommend look at it from a different angle. Think about, it's tangential but related. When I would run into tricky situations with clients and I'm like, why is this one approach not working? I have done it by the book. I have done it without the book. Why is nothing working? One thing that's been helpful is I'll go to the library and get a book about a first-person perspective from a person with that diagnosis to try and get into their head a little more of, how are they seeing what's going on right here? What else am I missing? What else can I gain? What other context to get a different angle? So the TLDR is notice if you periodically check in and see, where's my focus at? And if you're finding that your focus has shifted away, see how you can get it back. And one helpful way could be, what other angle can I look at this from? Maybe look at it from a different profession, from a different demographic, from a different role, from a different what have you, whatever may be relevant for your game. TLDR, I'll leave it there. I'll stop talking.
Sounds like a great meditation.
And once again, an answer that goes along really well with what Belle just shared in the chat about making an interactive experience in the shoes of someone with unmedicated ADHD and drawing on, personal experiences or shared experiences, as well as related games that ask you to take a different person's perspective on. So thank you for sharing that example, Belle. That's really great. And I think on that note, I will ask everybody to give another round of physical or digital applause for our excellent speakers tonight, and thank all of you for being here.